My hot take is probably that AI cannot do our jobs, and we're gonna be okay. We just have to learn how to use it well. I don't think we'll ever be in a place where AI is capable of practicing law in the way that we think of, especially in more complex matters and matters that require expertise and experience. There's no substitute for that.
Welcome to Between the Briefs, a podcast by Steno. We're here to bring you practical tips, expert insights, and real conversations about the pretrial process, court reporting, and the legal technology shaping the future of litigation. I'm your host, Adrian Seo.
And I'm your host, Joe Stevens. Whether you're an attorney, paralegal, or just curious about how technology is changing the legal industry, we've got something for you. Each episode will break down complex topics, share behind-the-scenes intel, and talk to the people leading innovation in and out of the courtroom. So grab a coffee and let's get into what's happening between the briefs.
Welcome to Between the Briefs, your go-to podcast for legal innovation. I'm Joe Stevens.
And I'm Adrian Seo. Today, we are thrilled to welcome Christina Natale, a leader in legal strategy, innovation, and operation. Christina's work focuses on transforming how law firms and legal departments approach litigation, matter management, and technology adoption, helping teams work smarter, faster, and more strategically.
With experience spanning Hike 2, Luff Law Firm, and Bailey & Glasser, Christina brings a wealth of expertise in building solutions that simplify complex legal processes, drive innovation, and create measurable impact for clients and teams. Christina, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here. How are you?
Hi, guys. It's great to be here. I'm doing all right today. How about you?
Doing great. Great. I'm so happy you're here. We can actually get this interview on the books and get it started. So I want to just start from the beginning. Let our audience know, who are you? If you were to describe yourself and your journey to where you are today, how would you describe it?
That could be a long one, but I'll see how we can condense it down here. I am 10 years out of law school, a little bit over, maybe 10 and a half now. I spent my first really 5-6-ish years really in the weeds in complex litigation and mass tort practice and high volume case management. I from there went to the United States Department of Justice and kind of did other side, but really in the middle, sort of more so the litigation part and mass tort piece of it than the case management piece, which is kind of interesting. And then when I went back into private practice at Bailey and at Leff, really spent more of my time on the operational side, back into the high volume case management stuff. Both selecting and advising, designing, implementing, administrating those systems to manage our cases and manage litigation at that level. And so about 2 years ago now, I joined Hike 2, and I really try to bring that kind of all together with all the things I learned in practice and all the systems I learned in practice and operations, and a lot of new and emerging technologies that we're seeing both in the corporate legal and law firm spaces right now.
Christina, when you're sizing up solutions like that, I mean, obviously, we've got our audience is like solo practitioners, it's larger firms, it spans the entire spectrum.
Yeah.
What are some hallmarks in solutions, case management solutions that you are looking for?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question because a lot of the time people don't really ask those questions. Right? Starting at what size is your firm? What type of law do you practice? What are your actual needs? What does your current tech stack look like? Because that differs greatly depending on the size of the firm, the needs of, right? What are you trying to manage? What do we mean when we say case management? So we see a lot. We see all over the spectrum. But the biggest thing is, I think, honestly, starting with those questions. Sometimes when we say case management, we do mean more kind of the operational side of just managing who are our clients, what are our matters, those sorts of things, billing. And again, that's going to depend. If you're a solo practitioner, if you're in a smaller plaintiff contingency firm, you're not billing time largely, right? You're just kind of doing it. And in that case, you might need a lot of automation of your, task flow, your everyday kind of, right? Making sure that you're on top of things, automating sort of documents, all of that. So I think those are all great questions to start with. But there are products all over the spectrum that are either kind of one-off solutions that are really meant for that, especially for a smaller firm that just needs their whole, their entire system managed in one place. And then there are pieces, other technologies that may or may not integrate with a larger tech stack for a bigger firm.
Hearing you talk about this, I could tell you've had treasure troves of experience and just knowledge on this. So it makes me very curious. You went from working with the Justice Department, right, as a trial attorney, to then going into operations management. What was that switch for you that made you realize I'm actually very passionate about this? I think I want to make this move.
That's a great question too. You guys are on it today. I'm thinking through. I really think it goes back to kind of that journey, and to give a little bit more color there. When I first started out of law school, I was working at small plaintiffs firms, but I say small, but in size, and we were doing national federal litigation. And in mass torts, a lot of the time you do have maybe just a few cases that are in an MDL or consolidated action, but you're really working up more kind of the cases on your side. At the firm that I worked at Jones Ward, we really, we were doing both. I was managing, hundreds, if not thousands of cases, and also litigating on the state and federal court level. So I would, and once we got consolidated, working on that executive committee, so running the national litigation and going to, court hearings and, all of that, conferences. And so at the time doing all of those things, working with experts, depositions, everything, we really at the time, and again, this is like 10 years ago, I was using a Google Sheet and a Dropbox, to manage all of these things. And it really was, I'm sure you can imagine, very time and energy intensive, for sure. And, the pressures of not only legal like deadlines, obligations, but really just wanting to, serve our clients. How can you do that sort of at that level with that? And so certainly that drove a lot of the move to DOJ, was kind of this like, oh, I'd love to see what it's like on the other side. Not only, right, that sort of, you think of the DOJ as it's like the biggest law firm in America, the most lawyers at a single, firm in America, but also on that side where you're not really managing individual cases. It's more so that high level litigation, that was really part of that. And so from there, I think that really drove, when I decided to go back, to leave DOJ, which was largely for COVID reasons. DC was really fun from 2020 to 2022, as you can imagine. That's where I kind of started to feel like, okay, if I'm going to be back in the weeds and I really love and want to litigate at a high level and service my clients, how can I do that if we're not leveraging technology in a way that makes our lives easier and takes some of the, tedious or repetitive or, those tasks that are really important and they matter, they have to get done, without really support staff or technology. So I think that was really long-winded, but really how I got here was kind of this, like, there has to be a better way, and understanding it, I guess, from that level of depth of, like, again, back to the original question, knowing what we mean when we say, law firm operations are managing cases, what really goes into the day to day, what resources our teams need, all of that. So seems like a really, obvious transition to me. And it's certainly been really interesting and exciting along the way.
Do you miss litigation at all?
I do all the time. I think the biggest thing I say about the transition is that I didn't feel like I could litigate anymore. By the time I got to Bailey and Luff, I felt so overwhelmed by just like the amount of work that had to be done. And I don't mean work that was like being foisted onto me. It was like work that I was like, oh my God, I can't believe we haven't done, those things that you're like, I know that I need to do this for every single one of these 5,000 clients that like you don't really have to do all at once right away, but like in my brain, I do. And it feels overwhelming. And so I kind of decided, okay, I'll take a few years and can maintain my law license and work within these law firms. And if I decide that I'm ready, like that we've done it, we built we built Mecca, whatever you want to call it, and we're good to go. Let's run this and I can go back to litigating. I would do that. And not only did it's always a moving target, first of all. And second of all, like I said, it's just been really empowering and interesting to me to get to work with, again, like I said, I mean, that experience of working with those, mass tort firms and at DOJ, but now working with law practices and, AmLaw 50, AmLaw 10, AmLaw 200 firms that have many different practice types and really getting to start digging into how can we leverage technology and improve and innovate in those spaces too has been really rewarding.
I can only imagine. We have a range of listeners, people that are in am law firms to ones that are in really small firms to medium-sized ones. For those maybe small to medium-sized firms that are looking to really change their processes and really take those first steps into implementing technology that can improve their workflows, what would you recommend? Where would you recommend they start, right? What is the key area that every law firm should target first?
As always, I'm like, all right, let's see how we can answer this in less than an hour. But no, as another great question. And I think I would actually start with like taking it back a step from one of the last things you said, which is like thinking about workflow. I don't think most lawyers at all think in workflow. That's just not something that we really do because most types of law are not that like repetitive, cut and dry, those things. And also, even if they are, it's things that you just do all the time, every day. And so you just know that you do these things in these cases. So no one's ever really largely, especially at these smaller firms, no one has ever really thought like, let me sit down and walk through every single step that this requires. If I were to do it right from start to finish, every step by the books, the best way that I've learned how or that my firm does right, how would I do that with like current technology or no technology at all? Like, what are the actual physical steps? I tend to go a level deeper than that as well and say like, okay, not just me, like I'm as a litigator, let's say, right, in a traditional firm that may have a really amazing career paralegal that does everything. I'm like, all right, like, Lauren, what do you do all day? Or like sit me down and walk me through. And I'm going to interrupt too. And every time she's like, I do X, I'm like, okay, but how and in what system? That level of detail, as much as it sounds really kind of silly and a little pedantic, is actually really necessary if you're doing it for the first time, if you've never used technology to enable your process in that way. And from there, you start to really see not only the biggest challenges bubble up to the surface, but repeated challenges. Like maybe it's once you get it to that higher level, it's actually not my biggest challenge is docketing. It's my biggest challenge is mass upload of documents. My biggest challenge is bulk generation of documents. I'm retyping the same stuff in 8 different places. I have to open the same PDF and keep finding that same information. Those challenges start to bubble up. And that's where I think you can really start to say, what is the right solution? By just saying, I need case management software, I think that's where we get all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, where if we're not asking those right questions and starting from a place of knowing what we need, we're just going to buy technology that either we're not going to adopt or is not going to address the root business challenges.
Yeah, Christina, what's interesting about what you're saying to me is, if I could like maybe if draw an analogy here, the when I talk to lawyers about AI, everyone knows it's there. Everyone sort of has a sense of what it does. People, generally speaking, will say things like, it's changing the game and it's here to stay. And it's, whatever the hot take is on AI. But then when you sit down and you're like, how do you use it? How do you want to use it? They'll be like, very often, they'll be like, it does all of these things, but I don't really know where to insert it into my practice. I don't know where to go. Is this tool better than this? But then when you actually pick a really specialized niche product, even if it's just one, it doesn't have to upend your entire practice. If it's just one thing that does it really well, that could then free up a lot of time, like there's direct value add and it's completely connected to what you were just talking about. And I'm wondering if that's kind of what you're saying here.
It really is. I think that's a perfect sort of way of thinking about it, because you could go down that path, right? Which is number one, there might be a really great niche product that's meant for exactly my use case. I'm like, I really need to, know any time that the statute of limitations for X in Y state changes and how that impacts my existing cases and cases going forward. I might just need a product that can do that for me. And that saves me A, time, and B, probably a lot of error, right? That's an easy use case that A, will alert you, and B, you can go and validate. We trust but verify, right? And then the second piece is maybe it's less niche, maybe it's one of those higher level issues that bubbles up to the surface, and I might not need a really niche product. What I need is a really good product at bulk generating documents from a CSV, or extracting information from my documents so that I can that. So I think that's a really great analogy to your point. AI is always a great way to think about, is this, and going back to that, right? Asking your paralegal what they do all day, every day. When you ask, like, how are you doing it? What system are you using it? Those are great ways to assess. That's what, right? Should a human be doing this? Is this a task that really requires human intervention, human review, what piece of the puzzle should a human be doing? I don't mean that in like a AI coming for our jobs way. I mean, how can we support our people and remove them from those repetitive tasks that are not, optimizing their time and their passion, right? Their service of clients. And then also, is this just basic automation, or is this a good use case for AI? Is this worth the value that AI would bring here?
A big question that comes to mind for me here is, at what point should an attorney realize that they do need to bring in a new software to speed this up, to clean up this process, right? Because, you get lost in the day-to-day of the weeds of running, cases and workloads and people working under you, working outside you. How can an attorney become skilled in identifying that there's an issue? And at what point should they know, okay, there needs to be a solution here?
Another really amazing question. You guys, seriously, this one is really interesting to me because, again, I think it does depend on the type of law and the size of the practice. And the reason I say that is that at most large firms, at most, of those AM law firms, you have specific technology and maybe even practice technology groups that are doing that are assessing those things. And you really don't get a lot of, in fact, it's the opposite. You largely have lawyers that are like, don't bring this new technology at me. Like, like we don't, they don't even understand, right? If I'm a lawyer, I'm like, you don't even know you might say that. You don't even know what I'm doing all day. How do you think this technology is going to help me, right? But I do think that, especially in smaller firms or more, firms that are larger, but really collaborate between the technology and practice groups, I think generally it comes from a place of, like I said, it's either someone that is just like, man, we do a really great job, but like I could be, doing so much more with some assistance from technology, or something really specific comes up in, one case. And I'd say a really good example, and I don't want to dig too much into any other topics we might veer into, but I think one really good example would be like a contingency practice within a large law firm, where there's kind of extreme incentive to kind of be able to do more with their time, right? Because they're not billing for it. It's all like, all or nothing. So those are the sorts of places where I think people are more likely to understand that they have a problem technology might solve. Otherwise, I would say, just at a general level, I think it's kind of all the same stuff. I think that lawyers who really understand the minutia of what they're doing, or maybe their support staff. I think that's an example from when I was still practicing, but in a more operational role. It really was more my paralegals coming to me saying, I'm so overwhelmed, like I can't do X, Y, or Z. Or me as a manager saying, why don't we have medical records for these 1,000 clients, these 100 clients? And learning that it's because they're really in the weeds trying to do, 1,000 plaintiff fact sheets that are due in this case and whatever. So really managing that workload and understanding at an operational level that you're overwhelmed, that's usually that you or your staff are overwhelmed, is usually a good place to start thinking, is this a human issue? Meaning, do I need to hire more people? Is it a human issue? Meaning, do I not have the right people? And then, okay, we have really great, amazing people who are doing more than they possibly could be and are passionate and great at their jobs and care about our clients, but they're still overwhelmed. That's, I think, when you start saying, how do we use technology to solve this?
I think another thing you're talking about, like, I remember being inside a law firm where we had this horrible, like, proprietary in-house built case management solution. It was terrible. It was so bad, but everyone was used to it. And so everyone knew it was terrible. It was all, and it was a big firm. And then the decision was made. Okay, we've vetted a bunch of products. Now we're going to switch gears. And it was such a better solution. And it was fantastic. And everyone hated the transition. Everyone hated the newness. Like, so it was stuck. It was lawyers being lawyers, because lawyers have, like, this is the way we've always done it. We don't want to disrupt the process. This process is hacked together. And now we've got this better solution, and no one wants to use it, and people gripe about the smallest things that they can't find as easily, whatever it might be. AI is so different because you can actually, like, do something in 3 seconds and people can see the results instantaneously. And I think that they can buy into it a lot quicker because you're like, oh my God, this is actually, I don't have enough time to doubt the results. Are you finding all of this to be true? How do you, like, deal with lawyers and teams who actually really don't want to upend processes, even if they're really flawed?
Yeah, I think two parts to your question. The first reminds me of your example of the kind of like niche use case that you're like, oh, there's a product that does exactly this, right? Anytime that you have a really good, simple use case within your entire workflow, that there's a exact product that will make it better, to your point, I think that's a really great example of you might still get pushback, but it's easy, like you said, it's easy to demonstrate those results, and it's easy to show, like, we're not, and this is the biggest piece, right, is we're not changing your full workflow. We're not changing your workflow really at all. We're actually just making this piece of your workflow easier and take less time. And that brings me back to the second piece, which is, again, all the way back to our documenting that current state workflow, because that is how I think one of the best ways to manage that change is being able to show people the same things are going to get done, and you're going to pick it right back up where you would from there. And now you have a starting point that you didn't have to build from scratch, and then you continue through. So being able to show people, like, I think that's the biggest thing. And to your point, Joe, anytime that you're like, we're scrapping the whole thing, here's a brand new process. We didn't even walk through, where and how it's changing, but like day one, get started, like do it. Like people are not going to accept that. It's not going to work. So I think it's on both levels, both full systematic workflow rebuild, right? Versus little pieces of technology that can assist along the way that are just going to lighten the load.
When it comes to implementing a new software, right? Not only is adoption a really pain in the butt sometimes, but so is speaking the language and getting that across in layman's terms of what a big idea is and then bringing it down to a very simple viewpoint. How do you go about translating that, right? Because I know you've worked in cloud-based software before and implementing cloud-based infrastructure. That's not an easy concept to apprehend always. How do you go about simplifying complex ideas into simple things to get them implemented?
This is another one of my absolute favorite topics. And I'm sure, again, Joe, and your transition from law practice to more of the technology world and vendor world. I always say that I'm like, that's like my number one piece of my job description, I think, is like translator. And I think we don't have a lot of that, mostly because I don't think you have to come from one side or the other. I think you can come from the tech world and be a really good translator to lawyers. And it comes down to what you're saying, which is just breaking things down in a simple way that people understand. I think, again, it goes back to, if we're talking about specific pieces of technology, I think it can be easier because generally you're explaining them to lawyers who are already, again, right, doing those things, and they understand, I need to redline this document. I know that I need to XYZ. So that makes sense. You don't have to kind of translate that. But to your point, when you're talking about, especially like you said, some of those cloud transitions, and now more than ever with AI type use cases, I think there's a lot of translation that needs to happen. I think sometimes, like I said, it is the easiest and best thing to do is break it down to kind of the either, I don't know if you'd say the lowest level or the highest level, right? Which is, especially when we're talking across practice groups, right? I might be trying to explain the same technology to a transactional lawyer, to, an immigration lawyer, to a litigation or e-discovery lawyer. And that might mean different things to all of them. The greatest common factor, I think, is we're going to use technology to draft a document for you, right? Instead of trying to get in the weeds of it, based on the data that you already have. That might be a way of doing it. Or it might be, okay, let's talk about let's talk about what you do, and then we can figure out, how it may be of use to you, instead of trying to just say like, all right, you're going to use this, or translate it to someone who doesn't even have the context of the system or software or what have you. So I do think sometimes it just takes being able to understand both sides of it, but I don't think that you're lost if you don't have that. I'm not trying to say that, like, you have to have a Christina, you have to have a Joe, you have to, right? But you do have to have someone that's capable of understanding how the technology applies to what the use is. And from there, I think things get a lot easier.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I mean, it's weird, right? There's nothing kind of like having a lawyer speak to another lawyer sometimes. It's not, oh, I don't know what it is, but sometimes it's just that it's like, okay, there's some solidarity there. We Adrian, maybe we should have done this from the jump, but Christina, I'm curious, can you just tell everyone exactly what your position is, what your company does, and at what point you're brought in? Like, the reason I want that context is because, obviously there's a lot of tech companies out there that are selling to law firms, and you get the meeting and everyone's skeptical, or they're like, why do we have to be here? Whatever. You're not brought in at that. Like, where are you brought in? How is it different? How is your audience different? How are they receiving you differently?
Yeah, I always laugh at this because as always, I know it's like kind of a joke because right back to law practice and operations, I'm like, I do everything all at once, everything everywhere all the time. But what's really interesting about Hype 2, so I guess I'll start there. We are a full stack data, cloud, AI consultancy for any really highly regulated industries and largely boutique law in the legal space. We service both, again, back to single practitioners, small firms, all the way through kind of those larger AmLaw and Fortune 500 companies, all of that. From there, when I say full stack, I really mean we do kind of everything from full strategic advisory work, which is sort of where I live, but we'll kind of go from there. Full strategic advisory work where we're assessing, current systems, current needs, and helping with either tech selection or really just under, strategy fully. Setting roadmaps for these sort of things, tech selection, all the way through. Then we have full strategic design practice where we help design solutions, and some of this change management and user adoption stuff, human-centered design, through implementation, hypercare, all of it. We really do. So the reason I say that is to answer your other question, is that we really come in at varying stages of things, but to bring it full circle, I think almost no matter when we come in, it's usually because either people understand their current system is not working and they want to start from there. And that's a really good place to start, right? That they know they have a challenge that they've identified and they want to solve. Or maybe they've already tried something else and it didn't go well. And so to the point, right, we kind of are, as much as we're coming in a different stage in the life cycle, largely it is an exercise in, well, like now we need to go back to the beginning and do not the full beginning, but we need to do just some discovery to understand, like, how did we get here and what are the actual challenges you're looking to solve, rather than just, messing with the tools and trying to say like, okay, it's better now, right? So in my role, and because of my background, I come in at a lot of different stages in the process. Sometimes it's like we're at IltaCon or, Clock, and we're just listening to people talk about, their problems, and we have these conversations, and it may be that we begin from step one, that advisory kind of level. Sometimes it's more specific versus like a roadmap. It might be they've already identified their challenge, what they're kind of looking for, and then the discovery is more specific to understanding current workflows, and systems, right? What are the integrations, pathways what are the actual technical requirements that we cannot mess with, or that they need in their solution, all the way through guiding our technical architects and solution engineers through, building those systems, or helping, partnering with vendors like product vendors to support demos or pilots and make sure that they feel supported. And then the last piece is sometimes we actually get brought in by our vendor partners, because we are, we have some really great partnerships with all across, we're very product agnostic. So sometimes we'll be brought in by a vendor partner, either during like an RFP process, or sometimes as, part of the kind of introduction, making sure that we're there from the beginning. So we're scoping not kind of the like full cost of ownership, not just, okay, like we want this product and we know that the licenses are going to cost X and, whatever, like what does it actually cost to build this, administer it, and keep it running? So
I like how you broke that down, that entire process, because it sounded you made something very complicated right there and just simplified it all the
I
way.
hope so, which again is right, all we can all hope to do.
So it sounds like a big part of this is recommending the right tools, like you said, your partners, right? Implementation partners, implementing the right tools. How do you go about identifying what tools the law firms actually need, and vetting that we know these guys work? Like these tools are the ones.
Yeah, that's a great one too. I'm working on two projects right now simultaneously that remind me of some of that. Because sometimes it's a very distinct, clear answer, where, let's say we're working with a financial services company right now that their entire platform is built on Salesforce right now. And so it's not necessarily like, sometimes you do want to start from a place that's like, if it's a system that you're like, okay, like, I don't know, we're crest level Salesforce partners. Most of our, techs are really, really skilled and have many, certifications in Salesforce. We love Salesforce. We're great. But from there, they're looking to optimize, right, their workflow in ways that, like, we're working through with them is, a new Salesforce licensing, right? Adding new features or capabilities to the Salesforce platform, the answer? Or are you looking to integrate another tool? Or is integration not even a good option here? So it may be that there's some siloing, but we can work through how, right, another, APIs, what have you, to bring that data together into a business intelligence system. So that's kind of sometimes how it works, is you're starting with the baseline of, this is the tech stack, this is what we're doing. Can we do this in the optimal way using the same systems licenses that you already have? And then the other project is a lot broader, where it's a AmLaw 80, AmLaw 100 firm, and they have a lot of technology kind of across the board. But most of the usual technologies most of the usual platforms you see in those larger firms, like the Intap suite, or Microsoft based, those sorts of things, as well as like a billing system separately. And they're looking to use, like we see a lot now, AI to help determine what are the terms of all of our outside counsel guidelines, and specific terms, right, for different clients in different use cases. And from there, it kind of gets really interesting, right? Because then it's like they're asking us to assess their technology and recommend, based on their current technology, what's on the market, what could be built if we don't, right? What if there's not something that's on the market that's really either compatible with our tech stack, or just going to be able to have the functionality that they're looking for. So sometimes it's more broad like that. And to your question, we do kind of all of that. And a lot of it is just coming from a place of knowing the industry and the products that are on the market, being able to compare those intelligently, again, based on their needs, not just the website says that X does X, right? So that, and certainly, like I said, some of those paired demos. So not just like paired implementations, really actually being able to ask, either for, a basic demo, or a more tailored, like having, having the product vendor solution engineers build out a demo, to show this is what we would, recommend based on your workflow. So there's a lot of paths to go down, but I think it's just having, I think we really do think of ourselves as partners with our clients. And so a lot of it is just being that, kind of external partner, or right, almost like embedded, fractional, what have you, being able to make those determinations and present recommendations based on all of the factors that are important to them. And then usually it's presenting kind of like an executive readout, and the stakeholder, they'll go back, and the actual financial decision makers will decide what they want to do before we move into the next phase.
Okay, so I have a question for you, Christina. You've had an interesting career pivot. You're still like you're young in your career. I think you graduated law school probably a couple years after I did. But you're dealing now with a lot of law firms, obviously other industries as well. But from the law firm perspective, from the outside looking in now, do you think that junior associates, new associates, should be actually like learning different skill sets internally than what you and I were learning at the beginning of our career? Or like, do you understand where I'm going with that? It just seems like the model is
Yeah.
sort of being upended, and the value that younger attorneys, practitioners, paralegal, whatever, might bring to this structure is having this more innovative tech mindset.
I think that's like the question of our time is kind of at a lot of these conferences that we go to, you meet all kinds of people and there's a blend of, and we've seen some like deans of law schools that are working really hard on, their innovation programs and some of the top innovation, programs at those law schools in the country. I think that so to take it back a step, I think that it should be like required curriculum at every law school in America. And to be honest, like to your point, Joe, like thinking back to when we were in law school, and I think about like the bar exam and all of that, and I've mentored law students since I've graduated. And, the questions are always like, I don't know what I want to do, like what type of law do I want to practice, etc. And like we can write like almost any lawyer, or anyone who's come from being a lawyer into some transition could tell you that like they're not doing anything that they thought they'd be doing when they were in law school, and they're probably, and I don't mean this in a negative way, they're probably not doing anything they learned in law school. And I don't mean that as like derogatory, like law school is so formative and important, like that's how we get here. I just mean it to say like we're not doing a lot of, really clinical like practice things in law school, because that's not what it's about, and because there's so many different things you can do with a law degree that like they would never be able to do all of that within school. Some of these other skills, like you mentioned, Joe, I think are more applicable across the board and are so important that like, and again, allow us to become cross functional, right? Cross intelligence, cross functional. They make us more well-rounded employees in any, I think in any field these days, in any industry. As lawyers early on in our practice, I think that's a huge part of it. And we see these kind of like, right, we can all still joke, it's been like years now, we can all still joke about like the Chat GPT lawyer. And like people are still doing this. People are still being, reprimanded by the courts for just like throwing something into Chat GPT and then filing it with the court. I think it's so important for young lawyers to learn how they can, and especially ones who are coming up with already kind of more of that tech background, they've grown up with it. I think it's invaluable to begin a law career learning how they can utilize those tools to make them better lawyers, rather than this like, oh, AI is going to take my job away. Like we should be hiring, people that are capable of that. And I think it'll just make, again, all of us better lawyers and bring our practices up to the next level. So I think that you're right on the money. I think we almost have to, I think it's almost irresponsible not to, it's just my opinion. Just,
Great take. I think also, with that being said, where do you see the future of kind of operations evolving into for law firms for the future? Because, AI is here. There are attorneys that are starting to use it. Young attorneys, even in law school, they may have not been taught it there, but they're definitely utilizing it once they're outside of law school. So where do you think the next steps are for the next 5 years for legal operations?
Yeah, I think, just like in any other discussion about AI, it's probably like, right, top of mind is that we're largely probably, right, we're all guessing here, moving more toward like agentic AI, right, that's capable of kind of like picking something up within the workflow, doing it automated and moving things along. And I think that's a really great tie-in to the last kind of question and discussion, because I think that is A, where we're going, and B, how we can really make ourselves valuable and better lawyers again, and help ourselves get there, right? Instead of this like AI is going to take my job away, understanding where the value we're actually bringing, like what is the service that our clients are actually paying us for, versus like, oh, I spent 11 hours doing a job that technology could take 5 minutes to do, right? The pieces it can do well. I'm not saying that technology can literally do. It can't. There are things that we do that that anyone does. But as lawyers, that, judgment is not something that AI is capable of, right? Logical reasoning, those sorts of things. Where can we use? I think the best use cases for AI are things where we're, analyzing sets of data, or, right, those sorts of things, doing repetitive tasks, what have you. The more we can understand our value and where along the way we're maybe not, maybe less valuable, and supplementing that, augmenting that with technology, I think is helping us move along to, I think we're moving with the tide instead of against it. I think that is the best way that we can get there, because again, I agree with you. I think it's not only here to stay, but going to become more ingrained in everything that we do. um, Understanding where it cannot do what we do, or not do it as well, or where it's going to be wrong, and we need to be able to review it and correct it before we write in the news now, not even a legal one, but right, the consultants that delivered a $440,000, advisory, document that was hallucinated, that AI had hallucinated and did incorrectly. I'm not trying to like pick on anyone. That's exactly the point. Like, okay, if you want to replace humans with AI, you better know that it's going to be right. And if not, you need to have humans that are capable of taking that piece, that starting point, and running with it and making it what it needs to be. So I think overall, everything we've talked about today is heading in that direction. And it's really, like I said, understanding how we can use AI and technology generally to make us better at our human jobs versus trying to replace them entirely.
All right. Well, Christina and Adrian, I think this is the first time I've actually asked this question. But last question we always ask is, what is your hottest take on the industry right now?
I'm like, oh no, wasn't that it? No.
I know what. That'd be it.
I'm
Yeah.
just, I think that's kind of part of it. I will say, I think that's it, is, all of this talk about, AI replacing jobs and all of that. I just think that, like, I don't think we'll ever be in a place where AI is capable of practicing law in the way that we think of. I think it's wonderful. I keep seeing stuff on like Reddit every day, is like, look at all these people who are like using AI to fight traffic tickets and break their leases, and they're winning. I'm like, that's amazing for them. And they're not, engaging in the, who knows, we'll find out, right? But as lawyers, I do think, again, and especially in more complex matters and matters that require expertise and experience, there's no substitute for that. There really just isn't. And so my hottest take is kind of, again, going back to everything I keep saying, I do think that innovation is critical to our profession. I think that it makes us better at serving our clients. I think that we're going to get to a really good place where we can hopefully optimize that. But I guess my hot take, as someone who is really a technology evangelist, I love technology for the law. My hot take is probably that, like, AI cannot do our jobs, and we're gonna be okay. We just have to learn how to use it well.
I love it.
Great
Well,
take.
yeah, seriously. And that's a wrap on today's episode of Between the Briefs. A huge thank you to Christina Natale for sharing her insights. Adrian, you have any final thoughts?
No, just a huge thank you to Christina. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Absolutely. Like, we're all gonna go take a nap after this. Like, our brains are gonna
No, it's
explode.
good. It really was fantastic, Christina. Really loved the chat. And to all the listeners out there, thank you for tuning in today, and we'll see you next time.
Up next on Between the Briefs.
I do think that there's just going to be a re-emphasis on what we were talking about earlier, these softer skills. I see it with my students. They have never before has a sort of class of law students have had this access to brilliance so readily available. And then the challenge becomes, okay, get on your feet and talk to opposing counsel or make a phone call. What is it like to talk to a judge, make an argument? How do you make a jury feel certain things? Those skills, I think they're really difficult to quantify, but it's one of those things that you know it when you hear it or you know it when you see it. And if you can make someone feel, if you can take all of these things, all of this information you have access to and make people feel, then I actually think that where we're going, that is the prize, that's going to be the gold
Stay tuned for the full interview coming to you soon. Between the Briefs is brought to you by Steno. To find out more about Steno and how we combine exceptional court reporting and litigation support services to deliver a superior litigation experience, visit steno.com. That's STENO.com. And then make sure to search for Between the Briefs in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your podcasts, and click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Steno, thanks for listening.